The rope snapped across Isaac Warren's lute strings before he even saw the hand that cut it. He spun on the ferry dock, 3 copper coins flying from his open palm into the brown current of the Velle River, and found himself looking up at a woman who stood half a head taller than any man on the landing. She was broad-shouldered, lean-waisted, dressed in fitted warrior's leathers dyed the deep brown of river bark, a close-laced bodice that cinched tight over her ribs, snug riding trousers tucked into knee-high boots with brass buckles, a short travel cloak pinned at one shoulder with an iron clasp shaped like a wolf's tooth. Her skin was the color of deep moss after rain, her jaw strong, her eyes a startling pale amber that caught the early morning light like a cat's. Lower tusks rose just slightly past her bottom lip, polished clean, and a dozen thin silver rings traced the outer shell of her left ear. The scar ran from her right collarbone across the top of her right shoulder and disappeared beneath the leather's old, silver-white, the kind a blade leaves when it means to end something. She held his cut rope in her hand and looked at him like he was a minor inconvenience between her and her destination. That rope, Isaac said carefully, was attached to the ferry bell. It was the only way to call the ferryman. I know what it was, Murbul Rageborn said. Her voice was low and even, the kind of voice that expected to be heard without raising itself. The ferryman is already crossing. He will arrive in 4 minutes whether you ring your bell or not. I cut it because you were about to ring it directly into my ear. Isaac looked at the river. She was right. Old Penter's flat barge was already nosing through the morning mist, poled by 2 hired hands. He looked back at her. You could have said something. I did. You were playing and did not hear me. She dropped the rope at his feet. I will pay for the rope. Keep your coin, he said, crouching to collect the 3 coppers from the edge of the dock before the current took them. I have a quick question, though. Do you always destroy the property of strangers who are playing a civil morning song, or is this a special occasion? Something shifted in her amber eyes. Not quite amusement, not quite offense. Something in between that was, Isaac would later think, the most dangerous expression he had ever seen on a face. Only when they are terrible at it, she said. He laughed before he could stop himself, and the sound surprised them both. His name was Isaac Warren. He was 27 years old, and he had been walking the river valley towns for 3 years with nothing but a lute, a leather pack, a good knife, and a considerable collection of songs about other people's heartbreak. He was not tall, not broad, not the kind of man who drew eyes when he walked into a tavern. He had dark hair he kept just long enough to tie back, a lean jaw with a week of beard on it, hands that were calloused from strings and rope and hard travel in equal measure, and a mouth that had gotten him into trouble more times than the knife had gotten him out. He was, by most people's measure, an ordinary man, quick-witted, soft-hearted, stubborn about the wrong things and careless about the right ones, and very good at being somewhere slightly in between belonging and not. He had not been planning to cross the Velle this morning. He had been planning to play the Millhaven market for 2 more days, collect enough coin to eat decently for a week, and then follow the valley road north to Caerfen, where there was reportedly a lord with a love of music and a generous purse. But the market had gone cold. A traveling merchant troupe had swept in yesterday with 3 fiddlers and a drum, and undercut every independent performer inside a mile, and Isaac had decided the morning ferry and the South Road were more promising than Pride. He had not been planning to meet anyone. Murbul Rageborn crossed the Velle on the same ferry, standing at the prow with her arms folded and her travel cloak snapping in the morning river wind, and did not look at him again until the barge bumped against the south landing and old Penter held out his hand for the fare. She paid in silver, twice what the crossing cost, and when Penter's eyes flicked to her tusks and his hand moved just slightly away from hers before the coin landed, she noticed and said nothing. Her jaw went a degree tighter, that was all. Isaac paid in coppers and said, "Good crossing, Penter. Give my regards to your wife." "She's still furious about the song," Penter said. "She'll warm to it." It was a compliment. It was a detailed description of how often she naps. "I maintain that napping is an art form." He stepped off the barge onto the south bank and fell into step on the road because it was the only road. Murbul was already 40 feet ahead of him, moving at a pace that was not quite a march but was certainly not a stroll. He had good legs and a light pack, and he caught up in 3 minutes without trying. She glanced at him sideways. "You are going south," she said. It was not a question. "Carefin. Eventually I tend to meander. I am going to Callow Crossing." She paused. "That is 12 miles south." "I know where Callow Crossing is." He shifted his pack and glanced at her profile. "I played there 2 years ago. Good audience. The miller's wife cried at every ballad." "She cries at everything," Murbul said, which told him she knew the place. "She once wept at the price of river salt." Deeply relatable. "I have also wept at the price of river salt." Murbul Rageborn did not smile, but the corner of her mouth moved, and Isaac decided to count it as a victory. They walked together in the way that travelers on a long road sometimes do, not quite companionship, not quite coincidence, but something acknowledged and not resisted. The river valley was green in high summer, the mill wheels turning in the distance, the smell of cut grain drifting across the road from the East Bank farms. It was a beautiful morning in a beautiful place, and Isaac was, for the moment, not thinking about coin or cold audiences or the merchant troop's 3 fiddlers. He was thinking about the woman walking beside him and the way she moved through the world, deliberate, unbothered, aware of everything, as if the road were hers and she were simply permitting it to exist. "What is your business in Callow Crossing?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Unfinished," she said finally. He had learned over 3 years on the road that that answer meant he should not push. He filed it away. "I am Isaac Warren," he said. "Musician, storyteller. Occasional poet when the money is very bad." She looked at him for a moment. Something calculated in those amber eyes, like she was weighing whether to give him anything at all. "Murbul Rageborn," she said. "That is a name that carries weight. It was my mother's. She earned it. Did you earn yours?" The silence that followed was different from the comfortable kind. It was the kind that had history in it. "I inherited a debt," she said at last. "I am here to settle it." Isaac did not ask more, but he kept thinking about it as the morning burned off and the south road curved between the millpond willows, and he thought he was beginning to understand what unfinished business in Callow Crossing looked like. He had played that town. He knew its shape. He knew who owned the mill, who owned the ferry rights, who held paper on half the farms in the valley. He knew about Gordon Asheville, because everyone in a 20-mile radius knew about Gordon Asheville, and there was only one reason an orc woman with a warrior's bearing and her mother's name would be walking to Callow Crossing with a settled face and a debt to pay. He decided not to say any of this. He played a short run on the lute instead, just to fill the quiet, and Murbul glanced at him sharply. "You are doing that on purpose," she said. "Am I? To get my attention?" "I already have your attention." "You cut my rope." She made a sound that was very nearly a laugh. "That was hours ago. My rope is still cut." She reached into the small purse at her belt and held out a copper coin without looking at him. Thumb extended, the coin balanced on it. It was such a precise, deliberate gesture, such a perfectly unbothered way to settle an argument that he plucked it from her thumb and said, "Thank you," with complete sincerity, and she finally, undeniably smiled. Just a brief thing, quickly controlled, but it was there. The first time Isaac saw Callow Crossing, 3 years ago, he had thought it was the kind of town that had once been charming and was now past it. The mill was old but still grinding. The ferry crossing, a different one from the Vell, this over a tributary called the Callow, was operated by a man named Davin who lived in a houseboat and rented the right to cross from the Asheville family. The market square had a good tavern, a blacksmith, a grain factor's office, and a notice board that held more debt papers than announcements. The farmers in the valley were polite and tired in equal measure, and the Asheville name was on the lips of most of them the way a bruise is. You keep touching it because you cannot quite believe it is there. Gordon Asheville held the mill rights, the ferry rights, the ground lease on 4 farms, and a blood oath debt that had been made by an orc chieftain named Murbul Rageborn 7 years ago when the valley flooded, and the orc clans who camped in the eastern foothills had needed grain to survive the winter. Asheville had provided it. The debt was recorded, witnessed, sealed in the old style with a blood mark, one of the few forms of binding contract that held weight in both human law and orc custom. The terms were generous on their face. Repayment in service, not coin, to be rendered by a named member of the Rageborn line within 10 years of the debt's inception. Durga Rageborn had died 2 years ago. The debt had passed to her daughter. Murbul told him none of this on the road. He had pieced it together over months of travel gossip, and had confirmed enough of it by the time they passed under the old stone arch that marked the edge of Callow crossing proper that he did not need her to. What he had not expected was to watch it happen in real time, to be walking beside her when she stepped into the market square and stopped, and when the two men leaning against the grain factor's wall straightened up and one of them said, "Rageborn, you are 4 months late," and the other reached for a bill of notice tucked in his vest. Murbul stood very still. "I am here now," she said. "Mr. Asheville says the terms have changed, given the lateness." The man held out the paper. "He requires the service period extended to 3 years, not 1, and the nature of the service has been specified." Isaac stopped walking. He was 3 feet behind Murbul and 1 step to her right, and he could see her hand flex once at her side. "Specified how?" she said. "Household service, resident in the Asheville property." The man let that land. "Room, board, and 1 silver per month." There was a moment of absolute quiet in that market square. A miller's apprentice stopped mid-stride. The blacksmith's hammer paused. 3 farmers at the well went still. Everyone in Callow Crossing had been waiting for this, Isaac realized. Everyone had known she was coming. "That is not what was agreed," Murbul said. Her voice had not changed pitch at all. "The debt was for trade service, supply runs. It was not residential service, and it was not open-ended. The terms changed. You defaulted. The default clause. There is no default clause in that oath." Her voice was very quiet now. "I have read it. My mother wrote it in her own blood. I know every word." The man glanced at his companion. Something uneasy passed between them. Isaac found himself stepping forward, not quite beside Murbul, but clearly not behind her either. "May I see the document?" he asked pleasantly. Both men looked at him as if they had not noticed he was there. "I travel the valley towns. I read contracts for people sometimes. It is one of my less celebrated skills," he smiled. "Along with the music." "Who are you?" the first man said. "Isaac Warren. I am a storyteller. I know a great many stories, including some about debt oath fraud in the valley counties, which is a subject I find professionally fascinating." He kept his tone easy and light. "The document, please." There was a moment. Then the man held it out. Isaac took it, unfolded it, and read. Murbul watched him without moving. The square watched them both. The document was, as Isaac had half expected, altered. The original oath marks were there. He could see the brown stain of blood at the bottom of the parchment, the old seal, the witnessed signatures. But the service terms on the second page were written in a different hand. The ink was too black, too even. The original ink had the brown quality of something written with a field quill 7 years ago. Someone had added to it. Not well. He folded it carefully. "This will be interesting to discuss," he said, handing it back not to the man but to Murbul, whose fingers closed around it like she was taking a weapon. "With the magistrate at Millhaven." The first man's jaw tightened. "Mr. Asheville will." "Mr. Asheville should be very careful about what he does next," Isaac said, "because a forged debt oath in the valley counties carries the same penalty as armed theft. I know this because I once wrote a very long ballad about it. The ballad was not kind." Murbul looked at him then. A sharp sideways look, the amber eyes reading him completely in about 3 seconds. Then she looked back at the men. "Tell Asheville I will speak to him directly," she said. "At the tavern, this evening, with a witness present." Her eyes moved briefly back to Isaac. "This one." Isaac felt something settle in his chest like a coin dropping to the bottom of a deep well. "I am available," he said. The men left. The square breathed again. Murbul turned to face him fully for the first time since they had arrived, and the look on her face was complex, wary, calculating, and underneath both of those things, something quieter that she had not intended to show. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Because what they were doing was wrong. You do not know me. I know a forged document when I see one." He shifted his pack. "And I know an ambush dressed as a legal proceeding." He paused. "Also, you cut my rope." She stared at him for a moment. Then she said, "I did not ask for a witness." "No, but you named me as one in front of a dozen people, so here we are." Another one of those almost smiles, carefully controlled. "I suppose we are," she said. "Come on. I need to eat and I want to read this document again." They found a table at the back of the tavern, the one with the wall behind it, which Murbul chose without hesitation, and the serving woman brought bread and a pot of valley stew and looked at Murbul with the blank, careful face that was its own kind of statement. Isaac ordered 2 cups of the local cider and said, "We will need it warm, please," with a smile that got him warm cider and Murbul a fresh bread roll she had not asked for but which the serving woman seemed to decide was a peace offering. Once Isaac had leaned in and said something quiet that made the woman laugh despite herself. "What did you say to her?" Murbul asked. "I said that the bread in this tavern was the best in the valley and that I was going to write a song about it and that the first line would name her specifically." He broke his bread. "People like to be in songs." Murbul looked at the bread roll, then at him. "That was a manipulation. It was a kindness." "There is sometimes overlap." He nodded at the document. "Read it, tell me what you see." She spread it on the table and read it carefully twice. He watched her face, the concentration, the small crease between her brows that deepened when she reached the second page. "This is not my mother's handwriting," she said, "and the service terms here specify the word resident. The original oath used the word correspondent, as in a supply correspondent, someone who manages trade runs." She looked up. "My mother was a war band leader, not a domestic servant. She would never have agreed to this." "How do you know the original wording?" Murbul was quiet for a moment. "Because I was there," she said. "I was 17. My mother made me witness the signing. She said that a debt made in daylight should be remembered in daylight." She folded the document. "I remember every word." Isaac was quiet. 17, watching her mother put blood on paper in the winter of the valley flood. "Asheville had someone add to it," he said, "after my mother died, so there was no one left who had been there." She looked at him steadily. "Except me. And your word against his means very little in a human court." "It means nothing." Her tone was flat, not bitter. She had long since passed bitterness on this particular subject. "Which is why I need the original. There was a copy made." Witnessed by the valley magistrate at the time, one Aldrich Vane. He retired to Caerphilly 3 years ago. Her eyes held his. "With the copy." Isaac sat back. "You need someone to go to Caerphilly and retrieve the copy." "I need someone to go to Caerphilly who has standing to request it. A magistrate will not hand a document to an orc woman who shows up alone claiming it is her mother's." She tilted her head slightly. "But a valley musician with a reputation for valley gossip and a charming manner." "You looked me up," Isaac said. "On the ferry crossing. I asked Penter. I knew Penter was a gossip." He smiled, and then the smile shifted into something more genuine and less performed. "You were already planning this when you cut my rope." "I cut your rope because it was loud." "You looked me up before the rope." Murbul said nothing for a moment. Then, "You have been in 15 valley towns in 3 years. You are known. You are not affiliated with any lord or house or trade guild. People talk to you." She held his gaze without flinching. "And you are not afraid of me." That last thing landed differently than she had perhaps meant it. Isaac looked at her, the amber eyes, the tusks, the scarred shoulder, the set of her jaw that said she had been watching people be afraid of her for so long that she had stopped expecting anything else, and said, "No, I am not. Most people are. Most people are afraid of things they have not bothered to understand." He picked up his cider. "I am afraid of very few things. Magistrates are one of them, forgers are another. You are not on the list." Something moved behind her eyes, something warm and complicated and carefully guarded. "I will pay you," she said. "How much?" Half what I owe Asheville in the original terms, which is a significant sum. She named the number. It was indeed significant. Isaac thought about the merchant troop's 3 fiddlers. He thought about Caerfen and the lord with the generous purse. He thought about the 12 miles they had walked together and the way she had moved through the road like she owned it and the copper coin she had balanced on her thumb without looking at him. "Agreed," he said, "but I have a condition." "Of course you do. I want the full story. Everything about the oath, the terms, what your mother intended. Not the legal pieces, the real pieces. Because if I walk into Magistrate Vane's office in Caerfen, I need to walk in knowing everything, not performing ignorance." He met her eyes. "I do not like performing ignorance. I am much better at performing certainty." Murbul looked at him for a long moment. "You are a strange man, Isaac Warren." "I get that a lot." He held out his hand across the table. "Do we have an agreement?" She looked at his hand. Then she reached across and took it, and her grip was what he had expected, steady, strong, warmer than he had anticipated, and they shook once firmly, and the deal was made. What followed next was, in the calendar of the thing, 3 days of waiting in Callow Crossing while Murbul arranged a meeting with Gordon Asheville, and Isaac played the tavern every evening for his board and used the performance to quietly, methodically, listen. He was very good at listening while performing. It was a skill he had developed young, playing in his father's coaching inn back in the northern counties. The ability to play a song that required nothing from him above the shoulders while his eyes and ears worked the room. By the end of the first evening in Callow Crossing, he had a good map of Asheville's local standing, his allies, his enemies, and the degree to which the farmers of the valley hated him with a quiet, helpless fury that had nowhere to go. By the end of the second evening, he also knew that 2 of Asheville's men had been in the tavern listening to him play, and that they had liked it despite themselves, and that one of them, a younger man named Cord, with the permanently worried look of someone who was following orders he did not quite believe in, had lingered after the others left, and ordered a second ale with the look of a man who wanted to talk. Isaac gave him the space to do it. Cord told him, in the halting way of someone who had been quiet about something for too long, that the document had been altered 3 months ago, that he had been in the room when it was done, that the forger was a contract writer who passed through the valley twice a year, and that he had not said anything because Asheville paid his family's grain debt. Isaac let him finish. Then he said, "That must have weighed on you." Cord looked at his hands. "She did not do anything wrong," he said. "The Orc woman. She came when she said she would come. What they are doing to her is not right. Will you say that to someone official?" A long pause. "Maybe," Cord said. "If there was someone to say it to who would not just take Asheville's coin and fold." "There might be someone like that in Caerfen," Isaac said carefully. He told Murbul that evening. She was sitting at the table in the back of the tavern, having finished dinner with the document in front of her and the oil lamp low, and he pulled the chair out across from her and sat down and talked for 10 minutes while she listened without interrupting, which he was beginning to understand was how she processed things completely, sequentially, in order, nothing skipped. When he finished, she was quiet. Then, "You got that from one of Asheville's men." "He got it from himself. I just gave him room." She looked at him. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Make people say things they did not plan to say." He thought about it. "I listen like I mean it," he said. "Most people do not get listened to very much. When someone does it genuinely, they notice." Murbul was quiet for a moment. She looked down at the document. "My mother was listened to," she said. "She commanded 40 fighters and she knew every one of their names and she listened to every one of them like they were worth her time." A pause. "People followed her into impossible situations because of it." "You are her daughter," Isaac said. "I am trying to be." She looked up and the lamplight caught the edge of her scar, tracing its silver along the line of her shoulder. "Isaac." "Yes." "Why are you still here?" "The arrangement was to go to Caerfen. We have not left yet. You could be playing the market tonight." "I played the tavern." "That is not an answer." He looked at her. The amber eyes were direct, almost aggressive in their directness, the kind of eyes that would not accept evasion because they had seen too much of it. "Because I think this is going to get harder before it gets better," he said, And I would rather be here. The thing that moved behind her eyes this time was less guarded, just for a moment. Then she looked back at the document and said, "We leave for Kerfen at first light." And then, after a pause, "Thank you for tonight." "You are welcome," he said, and he meant it exactly as much as she had. They left for Kerfen at first light. The road to Kerfen was 2 days north through the valley, then up through the foothills where the mill country gave way to scrub pine and open sky, and then down into the larger town at the confluence of the Vel and the Care rivers. It was good traveling weather, the kind of midsummer morning that the north never quite got right and the valley always did clear, with a running breeze off the eastern hills, the smell of pine and warm stone. Murbul walked like she had done this route before, she knew which farmhouses had dogs that would bark and which had dogs that would come out for a pat, and she knew where the road dipped into a marshy flat that was knee-deep after rain, but perfectly walkable in dry weather if you cut 30 feet left into the meadow. Isaac followed her lead and asked questions when the silence opened for them, and she answered more often than he had expected her to, not in the way of someone who was warming to company, but in the way of someone who had decided that particular company was worth answering. She told him about the eastern foothills and the Rageborn clan's traditional territory, the summer hunting grounds, the winter camp at the headwaters of the Callow. She told him about the flood, which had been worse than the valley people knew, had come fast after a collapse on the high ridge, and had taken 3 of the clan's winter food stores. She told him about her mother's decision to negotiate rather than raid, which had been controversial, and about the night Durga Rageborn had come back from Callow crossing with the signed oath and a cartload of grain, and the clan had eaten well that winter because of a human merchant's generosity. And about how the generosity had never felt entirely clean to Durga, though she had honored the debt every year without fail, and about how she had died 2 winters ago of a fever that moved fast without ceremony, 3 days between health and gone. Isaac listened to all of it. When Murbul stopped talking, the silence between them had changed again. It was fuller, heavier in the good way. "I am sorry about your mother," he said. "She would have found you exhausting," Murbul said. He laughed. "Why?" "Because you talk too much and you are too charming." She did not trust charm. A pause. "She would also have approved of you, which is a contradiction she was entirely capable of." "I will take it." He glanced at her profile against the foothills. "What about you? Do you trust charm?" "No," she said, "but I can tell the difference between charm and honesty. You use one to deliver the other. That is less annoying." They made camp the first night at a shepherd's shelter in the foothills, a 3-sided stone structure with a roof of old slate that had been used by travelers for 2 generations. Isaac built the fire and Murbul produced dried meat and river-flat bread from her pack with the efficiency of someone who had done long travel alone many times, and they ate with the fire between them and the valley spread out below in the evening light, the mill pond catching the last gold of the sun. Isaac played quietly after dinner, not performing, just playing, the way he did when he was thinking, low and meandering. He played through 3 songs that had no words and then into something older that did, a valley ballad about a river ferryman and his lost wife, melancholy and beautiful, and when he finished the last chord and looked up, Murbul was watching him from across the fire with an expression he had not seen on her face before. "That was good," she said. "That was nothing. That is just me thinking out loud." "Then your thinking is good." She looked back at the valley. "I do not understand how music works. Why one arrangement of sounds does something to you that another does not. I do not understand it either," he said. "I just know what the feeling is." He set the lute down. "There is a song I have been working on for 2 years that I cannot finish because I cannot find the ending. I know how the story goes, and I know every word up to the last verse, and then the last verse is not there. What is the story? A woman who carries a debt that was never hers, who walks towards something that could ruin her because honor requires it." He was watching her when he said it. "I have been writing it since I first heard the story in the valley towns. I did not know then that I would meet her." Murbul was very still. You have been writing a song about me. About the situation. I did not know you." He paused. "Though you are more interesting than the version I imagined." She looked at him across the fire for a long moment. Then she said, "And you cannot find the ending?" "Not yet." He held her gaze. "I think that is because it has not happened yet." Something cracked open very slightly in her face. Just a hairline, just the pressure of something that had been very tightly held for a long time finding a single seam. She looked away toward the valley, and when she looked back the line was closed again, but he had seen it. "Sleep," she said. "We have another day's walk." He slept. In the night he woke briefly to find that she had kept the fire going, which she did not have to do, and he lay in the warmth of it and listened to the night sounds of the foothills and thought about endings. Caerfen was a proper town, large enough to have a guild hall and a magistrate's court and a street market that ran 6 days out of 7. They arrived on the second afternoon, and Murbul immediately found herself the subject of the particular quality of attention that larger towns gave her. Not the familiar flat caution of the valley farmers, but the harder, more naked stare of people who had decided what she was before she arrived. She walked through it without flinching and without acknowledging it, which Isaac watched with a feeling that was not quite admiration and not quite anger but had elements of both. He found them a room at a posting inn, which cost him more than he would have liked, but had the advantage of being run by a former road merchant who had done enough business with the eastern clans that she treated Murbul with brisk professionalism rather than fear. The room had 2 beds and a window that looked out on the courtyard and a lock on the door, all of which seemed important. The magistrate's clerk told them that Aldrich Vane saw petitioners on Tuesdays, and that this was a Thursday, and that they were welcome to return in 5 days. Isaac thanked him warmly, inquired as to the magistrate's health and the health of his family, mentioned that he had played the valley towns for 3 years, and had a great many stories of the region that a retired magistrate might find entertaining, and secured an appointment for the following morning. Murbul, who had watched this exchange from 2 steps behind, said, "How do you do that?" Again when they were back on the street. "The same way you cross a river," he said. "You find the current and you go with it, not against it." She made the almost sound of a laugh. "That is a very poetic answer. I am a very poetic person." "You are insufferable," she said, but there was no heat in it. She was looking at the street ahead and he could see the corner of her mouth. They had dinner in the posting inn's common room that evening, which was loud and warm and full of travelers. And over the noise and the lamplight, they went through everything they needed to say to Magistrate Vane, methodically, in order. And Isaac found himself thinking that this was the best planning session he had ever had because Murbul's mind was extraordinarily precise and strategic, and utterly without sentimentality. She could hold 4 threads of argument simultaneously, and trace each one to its conclusion before Isaac had finished articulating the first. He had to push to keep up, and he found, with some surprise, that he liked it. He had been the fastest mind in most rooms he entered for most of his life. It was interesting to not be. "You should have been a lawyer," he said. "My mother was a commander," she said, "which is the same thing but with fewer documents. You would have been good at it." "I am good at what I am," she said, not defensively, just as a fact. "Yes," he said, "you are." And he meant it in a way that was straightforward and total, with none of the performance he usually wrapped around things, and she heard the difference because she had been listening to the difference all along. She looked at him. "You are not afraid of saying honest things. Charm is for getting into rooms. Honesty is for staying in them." He picked up his cup. "I would rather stay." The amber eyes held his for a moment that was several seconds longer than the conversation required. Then she looked at her food. "We should sleep early," she said. "The appointment is at 8. Agreed. But they did not sleep early. They talked instead, without meaning to, about all of it. The valley, the road, the songs that did not have endings, the way the Callow looked in spring flood when the foothills drained, and the whole tributary went the color of storm clouds. The orc custom of naming debts after the one who incurred them because a debt was a story and stories deserved their teller's name. They talked about his father's coaching in the north and his mother's singing, which was where he had gotten it, and about the 3 years on the road and what it felt like to be somewhere between belonging and not, how it had started as freedom and had slowly acquired a quality of loneliness he had not quite wanted to name. "You are lonely," Murbul said, not unkindly. "I am used to it," he said, which was not the same thing, and they both knew it. She was quiet for a moment. "I have been alone since my mother died," she said. "The clan is there, but she was the thing that made it home." She looked at her hands on the table. "I thought settling this debt would give me somewhere to go next, a direction. I am not sure that is how it works." "Sometimes you find the direction while you are walking," he said. "Not before." She looked up at him. The lamplight was low, the common room had thinned out, and they were at the back table again. She always found the back table, and in the warm quiet of the late evening, with the fire down to coals and the last handful of drinkers mumbling to each other at the bar, something shifted between them. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just a degree closer than it had been an hour ago, and both of them felt it. "Isaac," she said. "Yes. I'm going to say something, and I would like you to not perform a reaction. I will try. I think you are the most unexpectedly interesting person I have met in a very long time," she said, each word deliberate and unhurried. "And I do not know what to do with that." He let it land. He did not perform anything. He just said, "I think you are the most genuinely impressive person I have ever been permitted to plan a legal strategy with, and I know exactly what to do with that." "What?" she asked. "Keep going," he said. "Keep walking with you wherever this road goes." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood and said, "Sleep, Isaac." But her hand rested on the table near his for just a moment as she pushed back the bench, and when she walked toward the stairs she did not move, as if she were entirely untouched by the conversation. He sat alone for a few minutes with his cider and smiled at the empty table. Then he went to bed. Magistrate Aldrich Vane was 70, sharp-eyed, arthritic, and deeply bored with retirement. Isaac had understood this in the first 30 seconds of their meeting. The way the old man had leaned forward in his chair, the way his eyes lit when Isaac explained the situation, the professional hunger of a man who had spent 40 years arbitrating disputes and now had nothing to arbitrate. By the time Isaac had laid out the substance of their request, Vane was already moving, calling for his records box before the question was fully asked. The copy was there. Brown ink, blood seal, the correct language correspondent, not resident, 1 year of trade service, clearly dated and witnessed. Vane read it and then read the forged document and said, "This is a very poor forgery," with the offended tone of someone criticizing bad workmanship. He looked at Murbul. "Your mother was Murbul Rageborn." "Yes," Murbul said. "She was a hard woman to deal with, absolutely fair, though, never tried to wriggle out of anything." He looked back at the documents. "This man Asheville altered the terms after her death." "Yes," Murbul said. "With intent to press you into extended residential service under false legal obligation." "Yes." Vane looked at Isaac. "The witness testimony you mentioned, the man named Cord. He is in Callow Crossing. He will speak, I believe, if the right authority is present." Vane folded the copy carefully. "I retired, not died. I still hold magistrate standing in the Valley counties." He looked at Murbul again with the considering look of a man who had dealt with orc contract law before and had found it more rigorous than most human law. "The blood oath as originally written is valid and enforceable. The alteration is not. Asheville is liable for document fraud and for distress under the Valley Counties Code." He set both documents on his desk. "I will write the certification now. You will take it, and I will send notice to the Valley Court at Millhaven within the week." He picked up his pen. "Mr. Warren, you said you were a musician. Among other things. Do you know the old Valley ballad, The Ferryman's Wife? Very well, it is one of my best. Come back this evening and play it. My wife is fond of it." He was already writing. "Consider it payment for finding me something worth doing." They left the magistrate's office with the certified copy in Murbul's hands and walked out into the bright Caerphilly morning, and she stopped on the top step of the court building and looked at the document for a long moment. Isaac stood beside her and said nothing. He waited. She breathed out slowly. "That is it," she said. "That is the whole of it. This proves it." "It does." She looked up. Sky over Caerphilly was a hard, clear blue. "My mother spent 7 years honoring this debt. 7 years of supply runs every autumn on time without fail, even when the clan was short, even when she was not well." She stopped. "I thought if I settled it, it would feel finished. I thought I would know what that meant." "What does it feel like?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Like something that has been pressing on my chest is gone, and I do not know what to breathe like without it there." "Breathe however you like," he said. "You have earned it." She looked at him. That look again, the full amber weight of it reading him, and this time she did not look away. She reached out and touched his arm just below the elbow, a brief solid pressure that said something she did not put in words. He put his hand over hers for a moment. They stood on the court steps in the Caerphilly sunlight and let the moment be what it was. Then Murbul said, "We still need to go back to Callow Crossing and confront Asheville with this." "We do," he agreed. "And it is going to be spectacular." She almost smiled. "You are looking forward to it." "Deeply," he said. "I have a feeling it will make an excellent story." They spent 2 days in Caerphilly. Isaac fulfilled his obligation to Magistrate Vane by playing at the old man's house that evening. Murbul sat in the corner with a cup of tea and listened to him play for 2 hours with the focused attention she brought to everything. And it was only when Isaac launched into a new song, one that was clearly about a woman who walked toward an unpayable debt and carried it like a weapon rather than a burden, that she understood it was the song he had been working on for 2 years. The ending was there. He had found it. She did not say anything when he finished, but in the silence before the applause she caught his eye across the room, and what passed between them was the specific warmth of being seen in full and not looked away from. On the road back south, everything was different in the way that things are different when 2 people have decided something without quite saying it. They still walked at the same pace and still talked the way they had before, but the space between them on the road was smaller, and when the path narrowed through a rocky defile, and she went first and reached back a hand to steady him over a loose stone, she did not let go immediately on the other side, and he did not try to reclaim his hand. They walked hand in hand down the defile and out into the open meadow below it, and neither of them remarked on it, and the hand-holding continued. That evening, at the shepherd's shelter again, he played and she listened. And after the last song he set the lute aside, and she moved from her side of the fire to his without preamble, simply sat down beside him where the warmth was better and the view of the valley the same, and he put his arm around her because it seemed like the obvious thing, and she leaned into it with a long, slow exhale like she was putting something down. She was warm and solid and smelled of river water and pine smoke and the leather of her armor, and he pressed his cheek against the top of her head and felt her breathe. And neither of them said anything for a long time because it did not need to be said. "Isaac," she said eventually. "Yes. I have not let myself want anything that was not the debt for 2 years since she died." He did not move, he waited. "I want something now," she said. "I am not entirely sure what to do with it." "You could tell me what it is," he said. She lifted her head and looked at him, and he looked at her, and the fire was between them no longer, it was behind him, and her face was fully in the light and his was, and she leaned forward and kissed him. It was not tentative. She was not tentative about anything. It was a full, deliberate kiss, warm and certain, her hand coming up to the side of his jaw, and he kissed her back with all of it, the 12 miles of road, the rope on the ferry dock, the fire at the shepherd's shelter, the lamplight in the Caerphilly tavern, the 2 years of a song without an ending. All of it went into the kiss, and she made a sound against his mouth that was low and satisfied like something answered. And when they broke apart she kept her forehead against his and her eyes were closed and her hand was still at his jaw. "Well," Isaac said, slightly breathless. "Yes," she said and opened her eyes. The amber was very warm. "I've been thinking about that since the ferry dock," he said. "I know," she said. "I have been thinking about it longer. You cut my rope. I told you it was loud." But she was smiling now, a full, real smile, all of it, and it was the most beautiful thing he had seen in 3 years of walking beautiful country. He kissed her again, slower this time, and she let him, and the fire burned low behind them, and the valley was very quiet and very dark below. They arrived back in Callow Crossing on the 4th day. Isaac had spent the ride back thinking about Asheville, and Asheville had spent the 4 days, apparently, thinking about them. Because when they came through the old stone arch in the early afternoon, there were 4 men waiting near the grain factor's office, and Cord was not among them, and 2 of the men had the look of hired muscle rather than mill workers. Murbul saw them at the same moment Isaac did and said, quietly, "He knows we went to Caerfen." "He has contacts on the road," Isaac agreed, "which means he knows we have the copy. He wants it back. Or destroyed." They kept walking. The 4 men met them in the middle of the market square, and the same first man from 4 days ago, whose name Isaac had learned was Brent, held up a hand and said, "I am going to need that document." "Which one?" Isaac said pleasantly. "Do not play with me, musician. The copy from Caerfen. Mr. Asheville is willing to be generous. He will consider the debt settled, no further service required if you hand over the document and agree not to pursue the matter with the Valley Court." Murbul reached into her travel pack and produced the certified copy, and Brent's hand moved toward it, and she pulled it back. "This is a certified copy witnessed by a retired Valley magistrate," she said. "Vane has already sent notice to the court at Millhaven. There are now 3 copies, this one, the one at the court, and the one in Vane's personal records. You could destroy this one and every other and the matter would still proceed." She looked at Brent steadily. "Tell Asheville that, and tell him that Cord will speak." Something passed over Brent's face, not surprise exactly, more the resignation of a man watching a plan fail. "Mr. Asheville will not like this," he said. "Mr. Asheville should have considered that before he altered a blood oath document," Murbul said. One of the hired muscle men stepped forward. He was broad and had the look of someone accustomed to resolving things physically. Isaac shifted his pack slightly, repositioning it, and his hand was closer to the long knife at his hip without having moved toward it in any visible way, which was a skill he had spent several uncomfortable years acquiring on the road. Murbul looked at the broad man with an expression of absolute unconcern. "I would not," she said. "There are 4 of us," Brent said, not quite a threat, more like a reminder of the mathematics. "There are 4 of you," Murbul agreed. "And I am Murbul Rageborn. Do the arithmetic more carefully." There was a moment of genuine assessment in Brent's face. He had seen her cross the market square. He had seen her standing at the ferry prow. He had perhaps seen the scar on her shoulder and understood that she had received it in the kind of situation that ended men and had walked away from it. "Come on," he said to the others. They went. Murbul watched them go. Then she turned to Isaac. "Asheville will try again." "Tonight," Isaac agreed. "When the square is empty, we should be ready. We should also eat," he said. "I function poorly when threatened on an empty stomach." She looked at him. "How do you function?" "Worse," he said. "Come on." They ate in the tavern, and Isaac played his evening set, while Murbul sat at the back table with the documents, and ate her dinner with the focused calm of a soldier in a camp. And after the set, he came and sat with her, and they put their heads together over the layout of the square and the placement of Asheville's mill house, and what a man with something to lose would do when the formal approach had failed, and the legal matter was already in motion. They agreed that the most likely play was something designed to look like an accident, a robbery gone wrong, a fire, something that destroyed the documents and created sufficient confusion that the court proceeding would be delayed long enough for Asheville to extract himself. A fire was the most economical. There were enough mill buildings near the tavern to make it plausible. He would burn the tavern, Murbul said. He would have someone burn something adjacent and let it spread, Isaac said. The tavern is timber in summer. He looked at the serving woman across the room who was stacking cups and had no idea she was in danger. "We cannot let that happen," Murbul's jaw set. "No. So we keep watch tonight. Together. Unless you prefer to stand alone in a dark square at midnight waiting for arsonists. I prefer to stand anywhere I choose, she said, but she was looking at him and not the square when she said it. They took a position in the alley between the tavern and the blacksmith's shop 2 hours after midnight. The square was still and dark, the mill wheel silent, the ferry landing empty. There was no moon. Isaac had his knife and the short crossbow he kept at the bottom of his pack, which Murbul had raised an eyebrow at when he produced it. For a musician, she had said, and he had said, I travel alone on roads with very few good people on them. She had taken the crossbow and handed him her spare short blade instead, which was better than anything he carried, and he had not argued. They waited. At the 3rd hour past midnight, 3 men came across the square from the direction of the mill. They were carrying something. Isaac recognized the shape, a sealed pot of pitch, the kind used to waterproof mill timbers. He pressed his back against the alley wall and felt Murbul press in beside him, her shoulder against his, warm through the leather. 3, he murmured. I see them. Her breath was very even. Wait until they are committed. The men crossed to the far side of the square and angled toward the grain factor's office, which was adjacent to the tavern on its eastern side. They were not after the tavern itself. They were after the grain factor's office and the records it held, which was adjacent to the tavern but not the same building. Smarter than Isaac had expected. When the men reached the office door and one of them began to work the latch, Murbul moved. She came out of the alley at a pace that Isaac could only describe as inevitable, not charging, not rushing, simply moving with a fixed certainty that covered 20 feet in a time that left him 2 steps behind despite his best effort. She reached the nearest man before he had turned around and had his arm wrenched up behind his back and a knife at his ribs before the other 2 had processed that anyone was there. Put it down, she said to the one with the pitch pot. The man spun around with the pot raised, and Isaac, who had come out of the alley behind her, put himself to Murbul's right with the short blade in his hand and said, Please do not do that. We would both prefer not to be here at a fire. The man hesitated. The one Murbul was holding made a pained sound. The 3rd man bolted. Isaac let him go. He will tell Ashvale, he said. Good, Murbul said. That is the point. She released the man she was holding with enough force to send him stumbling forward, and he scrambled to his feet and ran after the 3rd man, and the one with the pitch pot looked between the 2 of them and then set the pot down carefully and backed away and then turned and ran. Murbul watched them go. Then she looked at Isaac, who was standing with the short blade still in his hand and his heart doing something considerably louder than it should have been. Well, she said. That was, he started. Necessary, she said, and effective. Effective, he agreed. You moved very fast. I have done this before. I am aware, he lowered the blade, your form is excellent. She looked at him, startled into something amusement, maybe, or the specific surprise of a person who has never been complimented on their form before. Thank you, she said. You are also not terrible. High praise. For a musician, she said. And this time it was fully warm, and she stepped closer and her hand found his in the dark of the square, and they stood together in the silent aftermath of the thing that had not quite happened, listening to the sound of retreating feet, and he held her hand and she held his, and the pitch pot sat unlit on the stones between them like a mundane monument. This is going to reach Asheville tonight, she said. Yes. He will know that a direct approach has failed. He will know the legal matter is already at the court. She was thinking through it, methodical as always. If he is intelligent, he will cut his losses. And if he is not, then we will be here tomorrow, she said simply. They were not, as it turned out, needed. Gordon Asheville was intelligent. He left Callow Crossing before dawn with a cart and 2 personal servants, and did not come back for 6 weeks. By which time the matter was already before the Valley Court at Millhaven. Cord had given his testimony, and Magistrate Vane's certification had been formally entered into the record. When Asheville returned, it was to a summons and a lawyer's bill, and the specific quiet dignity of a man who had overplayed his hand and knew it. None of this required Isaac and Murbul to be in Callow Crossing for more than 3 more days, but they stayed a week. It was not conscious, the staying. It simply happened the way things happen when two people have found something they are not ready to walk away from. There was the matter of Isaac playing the Millhaven market, which was only a half-day's travel. There was the matter of Murbul sending a letter to the remaining members of the Rageborn clan in the eastern foothills, informing them that the debt was cleared. A letter that took her the better part of an afternoon to write, because the language of debt clearing in Orc custom was specific and required precision. And when she finally sealed it and sent it with the post rider, she sat at the back table for a long time with her hands flat on the table and said nothing. And Isaac sat beside her and also said nothing, and that was exactly right. 2 days after the letter went, they walked the valley road together in the early morning, just walking, not going anywhere in particular, following the Callow tributary south to where it widened into the mill pond. The morning was very still. The reed beds along the bank were full of bird sound. Isaac had his lute over his shoulder and Murbul walked with her hands loose at her sides, the travel cloak left behind at the tavern. And in the early light with the mist still on the water and the eastern foothills turning gold, Isaac looked at her and thought that she was the most fully formed human, no, not human, person, the most fully formed person he had ever been beside. They stopped at the edge of the mill pond where an old landing stage jutted out over the water and sat on the planking with their feet above the current and the morning coming up behind the foothills, and Isaac said, "What do you do now?" "I do not know yet," she said. "The clan is there. I will go back. But the debt was the thing that shaped the last 2 years, and without it I am not entirely sure what the shape is." She looked at the water. "I told you, I am waiting for the direction." "I am still on the road," he said. "I do not have an end point. I know. I would like you on the road with me," he said, "if you want that." She was quiet for a long moment. He let it be quiet. "I want that," she said. "Then that is what we do," he said, and it was that simple. She looked at him and reached over and took his hand on the landing stage planking, and he turned his hand over and held it properly. And the morning came up fully over the foothills, and the mill pond went gold, and the birds in the reeds went loud, and it was, he thought, a genuinely excellent morning. He played one of the valley songs and she listened, and then he put the lute down and she leaned against his shoulder, and he kissed the top of her head, and she settled in with the ease of someone who had been carrying their own weight alone for a very long time, and had finally decided that this particular shoulder was worth leaning on. They went back to the tavern and had breakfast and told the serving woman, whose name was Riva, and who had been quietly observing their entire time in Callow crossing with the focused interest of a person who collected good stories, that they were leaving the next morning. Riva produced an unexpectedly excellent set of road provisions and refused to be paid for them, and when Isaac tried to protest she pointed at the lute and said, "Song about my bread, you promised." "I did promise," he said. He wrote it on the spot. It was 4 verses, and the 4th was about how bread made with care was the same thing as love made plain. And when he finished, Riva had her hands over her mouth and Murbul was looking at him from across the table with an expression he was starting to know very well, the one where she was pretending not to be moved by something and not quite succeeding. That evening, their last in Callow crossing, they sat on the outside bench of the tavern in the cooling air, and Isaac played through the song. He had finished the one about the woman who carried the debt, the one that had been waiting 2 years for its ending. He played it all the way through for the first time, and Murbul listened with her arms folded and her gaze on the middle distance, and when it was done she was silent for a long time. "You put in the shepherd's shelter," she said. "The fire at the shelter, yes. And the magistrate, all of it." He set the lute on his knee. "The ending is about a road, 2 people walking, no destination fixed, the direction found while walking." She looked at him. "That is not an ending. It is the right kind," he said. "Some things do not end, they just become what happens next." She reached out and took the lute gently from his hands, looked at it for a moment like she was learning how it worked, and then handed it back. "It is a good song," she said. "It will be better in 6 months." "Why 6 months?" Because you will have more to put in it. She looked at him steadily. I have things I want to do. The clan needs a proper trade agreement, not a desperation oath. There are valley farms that could benefit from eastern foothill goods and vice versa. I know the territory and I know the language on both sides. She paused. I would want a partner who knows the towns and the people and who is very good at getting into rooms that are closed to him. That sounds like a job offer, Isaac said. It sounds like exactly what it is. I accept. He looked at her. Also the rest of it. Also the rest of it, she agreed, and the corner of her mouth made the full smile again, and he kissed her on the outside bench of the Callow Crossing Tavern in the evening air, and she kissed him back with all of it, her hand in his hair, and 3 farmers sitting at a nearby table turned to look, and one of them started to say something, and another one elbowed him into silence. The night was warm and they did not go inside until late. Their last night at the Callow Crossing Tavern, Murbul did not pretend to sleep easily. She had slept lightly and restlessly since her mother's death, which she had not told Isaac, and which he seemed to have guessed from the way she was always already awake when he woke in the night. She lay on her side facing the window and listened to the mill wheel's distant creak and thought about the debt settled, and the copy certified, and the letter sent, and the man in the other bed who had come into this situation, because she had cut a rope on a ferry landing, and decided in 4 seconds that he was worth keeping. She had not made that kind of decision since before her mother died. The careful retreat into the debt and the duty and the practical management of survival, it had been, she acknowledged, a kind of armor, not the leather kind, the kind that was made of not wanting anything you might not be able to keep. She heard Isaac's breathing change and knew he was awake. You are thinking loudly, he said. I am thinking normally. You are listening too carefully. Occupational habit. A pause. What are you thinking about? She considered not answering and then did not see the point. My mother used to say that orc women who fall in love with humans are either very brave or very foolish. What did she think? She thought the two are not mutually exclusive. Isaac was quiet for a moment. Was your mother ever, did she? No, she loved a clansman. He died before I was born. Murbul looked at the ceiling. But she knew women who did. She did not think it was wrong. She thought it was difficult and she thought difficulty was not the same as wrong. She sounds like she was right. She usually was. A pause. It is a difficult thing to stop being right about when someone is gone. He said nothing. He just got up from his bed in the dark and came and sat on the edge of hers. Not presuming, just there, present. She moved over slightly to make room and he sat with his back against the headboard and she stayed on her side but her head was near his shoulder and the warmth of him was steady. I was going to tell you something, he said quietly. Tell me. I have been on the road for 3 years and I have been very good at being in between belonging and not, and I was comfortable there. I told myself it was freedom. He was quiet. I think I was lying to myself. She did not move. She listened. I think I was lonely, he said. Very, and I had gotten good enough at performing contentment that I had stopped knowing the difference. He exhaled. We sat at the mill pond this morning. I realized I had not felt like that, like I was somewhere I belonged in a very long time, maybe since I was a child. He paused. I thought you should know that, not as a performance, just as a fact. Murbul was still for a long moment. Then she reached up and put her hand over his where it rested near her shoulder. His fingers turned and held hers. You are terrible at being stoic, she said. I know. I find it useful. It is harder for me. You are excellent at it, the stoicism. I was raised to be. She closed her fingers around his. It is very tiring. You do not have to be with me, she breathed, long and slow. I know, she said. I am getting used to that. They slept. Or they came close enough to it that the distinction did not matter, and when the sky outside the window began to go from black to the deep blue-gray that was the earliest reach of morning, Murbul was awake again, as she usually was, in the half-hour before dawn. She was lying on her side and Isaac was half-sitting, half-lying against the headboard where he had fallen asleep, and the room was very quiet and the light was very new. She did not move for a long time. She just lay still, and felt the morning come in through the window, and thought about the next road and the eastern foothills, and the clan and the trade agreement, and the songs without endings that found their endings while walking. And she thought about how she had not expected any of this when she had cut a rope on a ferry landing 4 days ago because it was loud. She had expected debt settlement and legal process, and a solitary road back to a clan that was hers but felt, without her mother, like a coat that no longer quite fit. She had not expected to feel found. Isaac stirred. She felt the shift in the mattress as he came more fully awake, and then he was still, and she knew he was doing what he always did when he woke, listening before he moved, gathering the room. His breathing changed. She did not turn over. She just lay there, the morning pressing in, the old scar on her right shoulder catching the pale new light where the strap of her laced bodice lay loose. She had gotten the scar at 22. A border skirmish that had nothing to do with glory and everything to do with being in the wrong canyon at the wrong moment, with a patrol that had not identified them as the wrong target quickly enough. The blade had come from behind and above, and she had turned fast enough that it did not kill her and slow enough that it left its mark. It had mended. It had always been, since then, the edge of her, the visible thing on her that said, "Here is where you nearly lost her," and did not. She heard Isaac move, very slowly, very deliberately. She felt him shift and then felt his weight move and then felt the warmth of him close, and his lips touched the top of her scar, the very beginning of it at the crest of her right shoulder, and pressed there, soft and complete and fully intentional. Murbul breathed out. It was not a small sound. It was a sound that had weight to it, like something that had been compressed for a very long time was finally allowed to expand. She breathed out like she had been holding it forever, like every mile of the road and every year of the debt, and every careful stoic night of being alone and unafraid, and not letting herself want anything she might not get to keep. All of it went out in that single exhale, quiet and total. Isaac did not move. He stayed with his lips at her shoulder, warm and present, and she put her hand back and found his forearm and held it. "I was not asleep," she said. "I know," he said, his voice warm against her skin. She turned over then fully and looked at him in the dawn light, the dark hair loose from its tie, the lean jaw, the eyes that were awake and soft and direct and not performing anything at all. She looked at him and he looked at her, and it was the cleanest thing she had felt in years. "Isaac Warren," she said. "Murbul Rageborn," he said. She kissed him, slow and unhurried, and he kissed her back the same way. And the dawn came in through the window, and the mill wheel turned on the callow, and somewhere out in the square, the market was beginning its morning setup, the creak of cartwheels and the call of the grain factor's boy, and none of it touched them. She was not gentle, and he did not expect her to be, and he was not performing anything, and she held that close. It was warm and real and everything it was supposed to be, and when the dawn became full morning they lay tangled together in the narrow tavern bed with the light streaming gold across the floorboards, and she had her head on his shoulder and his arm was around her and his hand was resting over her scarred shoulder like it belonged there. "Your song," she said. "The ending. What about it?" "Put this in it." She was looking at the ceiling. All of it, the ferry, the forger, the shepherd's shelter, the mill pond. She paused. "This." "The ending of the song is a road and 2 people walking," he said. "Yes, but it should start here." She turned her head and looked at him, with a morning and a man who knows what a scar means when he sees one. He looked at her for a long moment. "What does it mean to you?" She thought about it carefully, the way she thought about everything. "That I survived something," she said, "and kept going, and did not let it be the whole of me." She met his eyes, and that someone found that worth that. She meant the kiss at the shoulder. She meant the weight of it. He understood. "It was worth a great deal more than that," he said. She looked at him. Then she settled her head back on his shoulder, and he kissed the top of her head, and she breathed evenly in the morning light, and that was it, for a while. That was all that was needed. The morning had been fully underway for an hour when they dressed and packed and came downstairs. Riva was behind the bar setting up for the breakfast crowd, and 2 early farmers were at a table near the door. And when Isaac and Murbul came down together, It was with the specific unconcerned quality of two people who had made a decision and did not require anyone's opinion on it. Murbul had her travel cloak pinned at her shoulder and her pack on her back and her amber eyes clear. Isaac had his loot and his pack and a smile he was not attempting to contain. Riva looked at them and said, "Road provisions are on the bar," with the entirely neutral face of a woman who was deeply satisfied with how things had turned out. They were eating the road provisions, the bread, which was indeed excellent, and dried fruit and river-smoked fish wrapped in cloth, when the door of the tavern opened and Brent came in. He stopped when he saw them. He was alone, and he looked like he had not slept, and his hands were empty, and raised slightly in the gesture that meant, "I am not here for trouble." Isaac's hand moved toward the knife at his belt out of habit, and Murbul touched his wrist once lightly, and he left it. "Mr. Asheville left this morning," Brent said. "He asked me to give you this." He held out a sealed letter and set it on the bar beside Murbul's hand. She did not touch it immediately. "What is it?" "Formal acknowledgement that the original debt terms are valid and that the service obligation is satisfied. He is cutting his losses." Brent's voice had the flat tone of a man who was repeating someone else's words. "He will not contest the court proceeding." Murbul looked at the letter. Then she picked it up and opened it and read it. Her face did not change. When she finished, she folded it precisely and put it in the inside pocket of her travel cloak over her heart. "Tell him," she said, "that the debt of the Rageborn name is settled, in full, and that if he is sensible it will remain the last business between his house and mine." Brent nodded. He looked at Isaac. Something in the man's expression was not quite what Isaac expected, not hostility, not the blank face of someone following orders. It was the slightly exhausted look of a man who had been on the wrong side of something and knew it, and was not entirely sure how to live with that. Isaac had seen that look many times on the road. It was the look of someone who needed a story to tell themselves that was better than the one they currently had. "For what it's worth," Brent said, "Cord was right. What was being done to her wasn't right." "No," Isaac agreed. "It was not." He paused. "But you said it. That matters." Brent nodded again and left. Murbul looked at Isaac. "You did that again." "I gave him a way to be a decent person. He did the rest himself." He picked up the last of the bread. "Are you ready?" "Yes," she said. "Where are we going first?" "South," she said. "I want to see the valley market at Millhaven. I want to speak to the grain factor there about eastern supply routes. And then I want to walk to Caerfen with you and spend a week and play music in the evenings and do absolutely nothing that involves a forger or a hired man with a pitch pot." "That is the best itinerary I have heard in 3 years," he said. She shouldered her pack. "Come on." They went out through the tavern door and into the Callow crossing Market Square, which was fully morning now, busy with the usual foot traffic of a valley market day. Farmers with carts, mill workers, the blacksmith's apprentice running an errand, the ferryman's boy selling river fish from a basket. The sun was bright and the square smelled of fresh bread and cut grass and the river, and it was, Isaac thought, a very fine morning in a very fine valley. They were most of the way across the square when a voice said, "Rageborn." The voice belonged to the mill overseer, a man named Petch who had the perpetually disapproving look of someone who had been on Asheville's side without quite committing to it, and now found himself in the awkward middle ground of having been on the wrong side of something that was still technically ongoing. He was flanked by 2 of the mill workers. He was looking at Murbul with the expression that was not quite challenge and not quite contempt, but was in the neighborhood of both. "I hear Asheville is gone," he said. "He is gone," Murbul said. "Heard he cut his losses." Petch's eyes went to Isaac briefly, dismissively, and back to Murbul. "Word is you had help with the documents. From a musician." He said the word musician the way people said vagrant or drifter when they wanted to be insulting without the risk of being direct about it. "Isaac Warren helped me," Murbul said. Her voice was even. "He read a forged document and named it as one, and he retrieved a certified copy, and he stood beside me when your employer sent men with pitch pots." She looked at Petch calmly. He did all of this because it was the right thing to do, not for the pay, though I am paying him, for the right. She paused. I am not accustomed to explaining the value of decent people to men who have spent their time employed by indecent ones, but there it is. Petch's jaw tightened. You think you can walk into this valley? I walked out of this valley, Murbul said flatly, and back into it, because of a debt my mother made in good faith that your employer tried to corrupt for his own gain. That is the whole of it, and it is done. She looked at him steadily. I have no quarrel with you, Petch. I have no quarrel with the mill or the valley. I have quarrel with fraud, and the fraud is settled. She tilted her head. Is there something else? Petch looked at his mill workers. They looked at their feet, neither of them willing to escalate a thing that had clearly already been decided. Petch looked back at Murbul and then, with the specific quality of a man who was backing down without being willing to call it that, said, "No," and walked away, and his workers walked with him. The square had stopped and watched. A dozen people, maybe more, had paused in their morning business to observe the exchange: farmers, market women, the blacksmith standing outside his shop door with his arms crossed, Riva watching from the tavern doorway with a cloth in her hand. Isaac stood at Murbul's right shoulder where he had been the whole time, and he had not said a word, and she had not needed him to. But she knew he was there. She had known exactly where he was every second. She turned to him. He was looking at her with an expression she had come to recognize, the one where he was fully present and fully warm, and not performing any of it. The morning sun caught his face, and he was not particularly striking, not the kind of man who commanded a room or drew eyes in a crowd, just a lean, dark-haired musician with calloused hands and a soft heart, and a capacity for honesty that still, every time, surprised her. She stepped forward and kissed him. Right there, in the middle of the Callow Crossing market square, with Riva in the doorway and the blacksmith at his shop and Petch walking away, and the farmers at the well and the ferry boy selling fish. She put her hand to the side of Isaac Warren's jaw and kissed him as thoroughly as the morning warranted, which was very thoroughly, and he kissed her back with his hand at her waist and her pack between them and his lute pressing into his shoulder, and neither of them paid the slightest attention to who was watching. Someone in the square said something. Someone else told them to be quiet. The blacksmith laughed, a big genuine sound that rolled across the square like a bell, and Riva called from the doorway, "About time," in the tone of a woman who had been waiting for this since Tuesday. When they broke apart, Murbul looked at him. The amber eyes were warm and clear and fully, completely present. "That was deliberate," Isaac said. "Yes," she said. "You kissed me in front of every person in this square who has had an opinion about your business here." "I did. As a statement." She looked at him, and the full smile was there again, unguarded, entirely real. "As a choice," she said. "Every time freely made." She took his hand. "Come on, musician. We have a road to walk." They walked out of the Callow Crossing market square hand in hand, and the road south opened up before them in the full summer morning, the valley green and the river bright and the eastern foothills golden in the light. And the mill wheel turned on the Callow behind them, and somewhere in a shepherd's shelter in the foothills, a fire had burned down to good clean ash, and ahead of them was Millhaven and Caerfen, and trade agreements and valley songs, and the long road that went wherever they chose to take it. Isaac squeezed her hand once. She squeezed back. He had been between belonging and not for 3 years, and he knew, with the certainty of a man who had finally stopped performing contentment and found the real thing, that the between was over. It had ended on a ferry landing in the early morning when an orc woman had cut his rope and looked at him like he was a minor inconvenience, and then given him a copper coin balanced on her thumb without looking away. Murbul walked beside him and thought about her mother, who had been right about most things, and about the debt that had been her mother's last gift. Not just the obligation itself, but the lesson in it. The one that said that a thing made in good faith was worth honoring, and that trust offered carefully and honestly was the most valuable currency in the valley. She thought about the letter folded over her heart and the scan on her right shoulder that had healed years ago, and the man beside her who had pressed his lips to it in the earliest light of a new morning like it was something worth honoring. She thought about endings that were not endings. She thought about roads. Isaac began to hum, low and wandering, the melody of the song that had been 2 years without an ending and now had one. She listened to the shape of it as they walked, the way it moved through the old chords and built toward something new, something warmer and less uncertain than what he had described to her in the shepherd's shelter. "Sing it," she said. "I have not written the last verse yet." "Then hum it. I want to hear how it sounds." He hummed the last verse, the one that did not have words, the one that was just the shape of a road and two people walking and the morning behind them and the valley ahead. And she listened with her hand in his and the sun on her face, and the valley opened wide around them, full of all the things they had not done yet. The road went south. They followed it, and wherever it led, they went there together.